Hello, welcome to the Joshua Lynn. Today we have a very special program in collaboration with the Cornelius R. Rick Celebration 2008. The topic is Black Women in Politics. And before I introduce our outstanding panel, I'd like to remind you that Ashley Montague believed that women was God's foremost creation. However, Professor Eugenia Bain of City College went one step further in the Black Studies Department. She talked about Black women being God's most supreme, outstanding creation. That's what she said in class when I took a course with her, Eugenia Bain. She lived on Convent Avenue, and she taught at the City College of New York. And so let me introduce our panel. From my right, Cynthia McKinney, the presidential candidate for the Green Party. And next to her, Viney Burroughs, writer, poet, and sometimes actress. And then we have Dr. Donald Smith. Donald Smith is with the Green Party. And then we have another very special, outstanding Black woman, Nellie Hester Bailey. And she's the president of the Harlem Tenants Council. But I remember her way back when she was one of the leaders of the Columbia Tenants Union. And then we have Judge Shala Abdus Salam.
Yes, Sheila Abdus Salam. Thank you.
Oh,
Your
well,
Supreme Court Justice.
I'm not always known as being a perfect linguist, I'll tell you. And then next here is Judge Deborah James. And I know Cornelius Ricks, who I work with, said something about her being a hip-hop judge. Is that true?
We'll talk about maybe that'll.
She'll talk about it later. But first, since we have these beautiful, outstanding Black women here, excluding me and Donald, I want to introduce the King Ayusoba from Upper East region of Ghana to give you some splendid entertainment.
Bata joy kaka Humise Signa
Yaba mela Yaba mara kansa de kisko mo kansa kwampa Kina yisa ba sigbongo sanga we wana to wana lo batana kai Africa
Africa to landing. 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 Let's be together to help Africa. Africa will not fall back. Africa they go forward, forward, forward. Africa they go forward, forward, forward. Africa they go 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 forward. Let's be together to help Africa. Africa will not fall back. Africa they go forward, forward, forward. Africa they go forward, forward, forward. Africa they go 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 forward. Let's be together to help Africa. Africa will not fall back. Africa they go forward. My father, I want to see you, my father. I want to see you, my father.
Yeah, whatever. Kai.
Sing up. Father,
I want to see you, my father. I want to see you, my father. I want to see you, my father. Yesterday, evening time, your girlfriend, she come for you, she no see you. She tell me say, if me my father come, I should tell my father, he should put 100,000. Tomorrow morning, she go come and call it. Tomorrow morning, she go come and call it. What we say? My father, the way you do, it is not fine. The way you do, it is not fine. Every day and every night, I suffer money matter. I suffer money matter. The way you do, it is not fine. The way you do, it is not fine. I want to see my father. I want to see my father. I want to see my father. I want to see you, my father. I want to see you, my father. I want to see you, my father. Yesterday, evening time. Yesterday, evening time. Your girlfriend, she can't find you. She don't see you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. In Africa, they don't take buffering. This is what they enjoy, and this is what sustains them. And now we want to discuss, we want to start with our discussion, Black women in politics. So I open it up to our two moderators, Nellie Hester Bailey and Donald Smith. Go right ahead.
Thank you so much, Josh. I'm very happy to be here with our distinguished panelists as well as a live audience, and I think we're going to have a great discussion. And of course, I'd like to introduce or have my co-moderator here, our co-moderator here, to say something as well. Go ahead, please.
Well, as you are, I'm delighted to be here. It's an honor. When I was a little boy growing up in Chicago, I lived in the Ida B. Wells housing project. And those were the two most famous people I'd heard of. Ida B. Wells, the great journalist who wrote about lynching and who was an activist in politics and who was run out of Memphis and came to Chicago. And Joe Louis, of course, was the other person. It's been a long journey. We have many outstanding Black women in politics. We have congresspersons, we have judges, we've had a senator. One of these days we're going to have a governor, and one of these days we're going to have a president.
Yeah.
That's right. Very simple. I'd just like to pick up from my moderator, co-moderator here, and just give us, our audience, a little bit of some data just in terms of the actual numbers. I looked this up. I understand of the 635 congressional members that we have, only 13 are women of color, African American women. And of the 237 state legislatures that we have, of the 1,748 women legislators that we have, only 237 are African American women. And of course, we have only 2 mayors that are African American. That's Shirley Franklin, who is in Atlanta, and Sheila Dixon of Baltimore, Maryland. So having established this rather poor and not poor, but dismal record of representation of African American women, I think I'd like to start asking Cynthia our first question here, since she is running on the Green Party ticket for president. How do you see your candidacy and your campaign as being historic in the sense of African American women or women of the African descent playing a role in the social transformation of this country, and how do you intersect gender with race in your campaign, both from a personal and a political level or point of view?
I guess I should probably start with the fact that in 1848, women and the very wise men who supported them launched a 72-year struggle in this country to win the right to vote. And among those men and women were Black men and were Blacks. And one of those very famous women is Sojourner Truth. And at one of those women's conventions in Akron, Ohio, is when she made the oration, "Ain't I a Woman?" But we can look at the fact that women have run for office, run for president, actually, of this country, even before women got the right to vote. And we've had 3 women that I can think of, Shirley Chisholm, Lenora Fulani, and Carol Moseley Braun, to actually run for president. Lenora Fulani has the distinction of being the only one who was actually on every ballot in this country. Quite a phenomenal accomplishment given the ballot access laws that I'm only just now learning about. My Power to the People campaign is now been endorsed by the Green Party. And so we've got me as the presidential candidate, but my running mate is Rosa Clemente, a Black Puerto Rican woman. And so I think that this is particularly historic, that we have a 2-woman ticket led by women of color, and one a very young, very well accomplished, a journalist, intellectual, scholar, but also hip hop activist.
Oh, I'd like to ask jurist Deborah James a question. Cynthia McKinney just mentioned Rosa, who is her vice presidential running mate, Rosa Clemente, and that Rosa is an integral force in the hip-hop movement. And I heard somebody say just a few minutes ago that you too are a force in the hip-hop movement. How do you see the hip-hop movement being energized to promote Black women in politics?
Well, I'm rather privileged to be given that that title. I'm not sure that I really deserve it in terms of my years. I might sort of defer to the younger generation, but I am extremely excited about the interest of young people in politics. I think it's the next generation that will be responsible for whatever progress we do make, and it's very exciting to know that they're interested in politics and becoming active, and will, I think, make the difference in terms of who is elected to these elective offices. I mean, I think I've gotten the title only because many years ago, I've been a judge for 13 years, a group of young people appeared in small claims court who had a dispute over, with a radio station over an event that they had planned, and they felt that the radio station had breached their contract, the agreement to advertise this event. And my courtroom was crowded with young people, but I was very excited that they would see the courts as a place where they could obtain some, at least decision in terms of their dispute. I ended up ruling against the young people, but I decided to do it in hip-hop, sort of my very weak attempt to render decision in hip-hop, really as a celebration of the fact that they had come to court and used the court to try to resolve their disputes, rather than try to figure out a way to do it, perhaps using other means. And so I was very proud of them that night. Again, it was night. They all had day jobs, but they took the time to come to court to attempt to vindicate their rights.
Well, Viney, I'd like to ask you a question. Even though the title of this program is Black Women in Politics, we don't mean just women who are holding elected offices or who are distinguished jurists, but we are also talking about Black women, as Don talked about Ida B. Wells and Sojourner Truth, women who are activists, who have changed the course of history of their communities, and you are with Grannies for Peace. and you have taken, there have been numerous activities all over the city, a very strong message against the war, not only in words, but with activities, not only in this country, but really around the world. We were at a conference together in Venezuela. So tell us about your activism and why it is so important for community activism on that local level, that grassroots level, to be part of this movement for change, and how successful that can be with the kind of activities that you have had.
Well, let me try to answer some of the issues that you have raised. I think it's wonderful that we have talked about Sojourner Truth and Ida B. Wells and Harriet Tubman, and there are others. But I would like to, and I want to talk about the grannies. But what interests me particularly, is the fact that we're talking about black women in politics, and politics is power, and politics has to do with policy. Mm-hmm. So everything is politics. The price we pay for gas is political. Mm-hmm. The price we pay for flour is a political price. So that when we talk about what women do, ordinary women that we don't know, we don't read about in the papers, but women who feed their families and send their children to school and try to make do and try to stretch a dollar. I found a poem by a woman called Hattie Gossett, a very, very fine poem. And it seemed to me that it expressed some of what Cynthia McKinney's candidacy means to us. And she calls the poem, she titles it, 21st Century Black Warrior Women Chant for Strengthening the Nerves and Getting Yourself Together. Sisters, mothers, cousins, girlfriends, aunties, lovers, grandmothers, daughters, we honor your women's selves. We pour libation to you. You who sing the original breakout song, steal away, steal away, steal away, 'cause we ain't got long to stay here. You who won't bow down to no father or husband or lover or boss or government. You who waylay rapists and child abusers and absentee landlords in alleyways and on rooftops. You who resist the dope dealer and outslick the pimp. You who keep Mr. Executive hands in their place. You who plan and carry out the work slowdown and the strike. You who outmaneuver the overseer in the fields under the hot sun or in the factory on the air-conditioned assembly line. You who break up all madam's fine china and sprinkle rust on her imported linens. You who mix dried blood and powdered glass into master's quiche and salad. You who raise children to love themselves and create solutions. You who dream and plan and work with us for the future. With your bad women's selves, we honor you.
I can't think of a better answer.
Well,
Justice Sheila Abdul-Salam, I heard your colleague, Justice, say that she had ruled against a group of young black people who were in the court, but that she was very much in sympathy with their attempts to learn how to use the criminal justice system.
Actually, civil.
Yeah. The case of the students who were on their way to a wake is now a cause célèbre in New York City. Their arrest, some of them by the police, and their teachers who are attempting to support them were placed in jeopardy. In fact, another version of the trial took place, I think, on Wednesday. What do you suggest we need to do to teach our young people how to use the justice system? What do we do?
Well, first let me say I'm very pleased and honored to be on this distinguished panel with such distinguished black women and to have people in this audience. I don't see as many young people here as possibly we might have had because it is Friday night. And I won't speak directly about that particular case because judges are not allowed to speak about cases that are pending in our courts. So I'm going to answer the broader question that you've asked about how our young people can be taught to use the criminal justice system or any part of the justice system to redress wrongs. As with everything, it starts at home and not the television, because television, what they learn on television is very different than what is reality, unless it's one of those reality shows. Parents or guardians can talk about how their young people should conduct themselves in the streets when they're confronted by the police. That they should essentially not say very much except who they are and answer the questions that the police ask them very politely so that they can get home safely or wherever they're going safely. There are a number of programs in our high schools and in our junior high schools attempting to teach our young people about how they should conduct themselves when they are confronted by the police. And those programs, I think, are the best way for our students to learn, not from the actual experiences that some of them have had with the police, particularly here in New York City. There are a number of projects that produce books that our young people can read about their rights. And in fact, the court system has been cooperating with our schools to have judges like me, like Judge James, and like others go into the schools to talk to our young people about the law and access to the law. And in fact, in New York State, one of our top administrative judges is our Deputy Chief Administrative Judge for Justice Initiatives is a black woman, Judge Juanita Bing Newton, and she has been conducting for the last few years an entire office around getting access to the courts for those groups of people who are usually not granted access or believe they don't have access to the courts.
Thank you.
Thank you. My question is for Cynthia and the rest of the panelists. The U.S. economy is in free fall. We certainly have as many even critics or supporters of the current administration admit that we are in a depression, not a recession. The country has committed nearly $3 trillion in wars that have been described as endless wars, in that there's no ending in sight. And we know, given all of the current crises, from the subprime lending crisis, the housing meltdown, that we are in store for even worsening conditions, and that the hardest hit will be communities of color. And in communities of colors, the hardest hit will be black communities. So what are we to do? How are we to address this crisis? How are we to prepare our people for the worst to come? And how do we look at public policy, if that is possible, to deal with this deepening crisis, economic crisis, that is on a world stage? Cynthia?
Well, I guess there's a lot of things that I could discuss. One is the war economy, and the fact that we've got an administration pressing for this concept of endless war. The war economy is a result